Alright, everybody. For today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about rock, paper, scissors balance in game design. How it became an essential foundation for the strategy genre, some of the major considerations that go into it, and how it's kind of become butchered by strategy games today, especially on the mobile scene. But, to begin with, if you've somehow never heard of the game rock, paper, scissors, rock, paper, scissors balance, and for the rest of our little video, we're just going to short into RPS, is a very simple balancing system. What it simply means is that for every choice, unit type, weapon, spell, you name it in a game, it will always be incredibly effective against one other element, and will be extremely ineffective against another. And as I said a few seconds ago, this has been the foundation for many strategy games, RPGs, and even tactical-based games. And it became that for several reasons. The first is that it provides a very easy to understand foundation for how the rules of your game work. We all know that fire causes things to burn. So we have a fire spell, and we have a wooden or grass type enemy. Fire would be really good against that. And what puts out fire? Water. And so on and so forth. Because of how easy it works, it really shortens the learning curve for any strategy game that makes use of it. While you may have dozens of unit types in a strategy game, as long as they're categorized into very clean and organized groups, you can set up the RPS system accordingly. For instance, anyone who's played a strategy game has most likely played Age of Empires. And Age of Empires has made use of cavalry beats archers, archers beat spearmen, spearmen beat cavalry. And even though I've been describing real world elements and rules, you can also apply this to other games as well. For instance, in the Starcraft universe, while there aren't as clear-cut rules as to what's strong against what, the game does provide easy to understand elements, such as the Zerglings are great when they're surrounding a stronger enemy. Larger anti-air units are obviously good against air units, and a unit that can only attack ground is weak against an air unit who can attack both. But the whole point of an RPS system is that it allows developers to have a very organized foundation and set of rules for defining their bounds, and then this can be used to create some very interesting dynamics and tricky behaviors. For instance, you could have an archer who may normally be weak or be strong against spearmen. You could have an archer that is actually, weak against cavalry. You can have an archer that could be an anti-cavalry unit and who's weak against spearmen. In essence, you're basically saying that your scissors unit is stronger against rock than it is paper. You could have units that have different armor types, could have different modes. They could switch from an anti-air function to an anti-ground, infantry to a vehicle, anything crazy that you can think of. And again, the reason why this became so popular was it provided a solid foundation for the strategy genre. And even then, even with the decline of it, we still see this in RPGs with the use of different spells or Pokemon and so on and so forth. Now with that said though, while this may sound like it's a very easy thing to balance, there are some important considerations you have to understand about how this works. So the first point is pretty much defining how strong are the counters. What that means is, if I have, let's say, one paper unit and one scissors unit, does that immediately win in a one-on-one fight? Are there any other considerations that could impact that? Such as, let's say, elevation, having a cover bonus. What about leveling up an equipment? If I research, let's say, level 2 armor for my rock unit, then does that mean that it can now survive while fighting a paper unit? And then we get even more crazy combinations, such as how many of each individual unit can one beat? So this is a big point, especially for strategy games, because one of the major reasons why people use the RPS system is that it promotes group or army diversity. You're not just going to build all archers or all cavalry units, because I know I can counter that. But how many of the counter do I need? So if you have, let's say, an army of 50 cavalry, can I beat that with 20 spearmen, 40 spearmen, 5 spearmen? You have to be really careful when it comes to this balance, because if you set it too strong, then it's simply a case of I watch over my opponent builds, I immediately build a counter, I win. If it's too weak, then it becomes a case of I know what the enemy's going to do, I build my army to counter it, but because he or she just spawned more units than me, I automatically lose. And again, you have to be very considerate as to just how these compositions work. Another interesting case is when you start dealing with the split diversity of these kinds of games or these units, such as, let's say, instead of having just a rock, paper, scissors, we have different tiers. So there's a level 3 rock unit, there's a level 5, let's say, ultimate air unit, or scissors, and so on. When you get to these cases, you have to be really careful again with just how much does that added cost add to that unit's utility. If I just save up all my resources and buy, let's say, the ultimate scissors-based unit who's so strong that even rock units can't beat it, then what hope does the enemy have? But on the other hand, if I build that unit and a level 1 rock unit can kill it, then I just wasted all that time and resources on it. And then, as I said earlier, with units that break those conventions, a rock unit that's good against paper, for instance, how strong do you make that? Because then we run into those very weird situations of, should the rock unit be able to immediately kill a paper? Should it just be okay? And again, all these little decisions and balancing goes into creating a strategy or an RPS system. Now, with that said though, while this has proven to be very popular, it can be, I guess, quote-unquote perverted. And the big point about this comes down to what we see in the mobile side and kind of the waning years of the strategy genre's dominance on the PC. So let's start with the waning side. At the end of the last decade, I didn't even start this one, we saw strategy game developers trying to push more towards the esports crowd, trying to add more persistence and progression to their strategy games. And of course, the big ones being Command & Conquer 4 and Command & Conquer Red Alert 3. With both games, EA tried to position them as to be the next big esport to counter, of course, the dominance of Starcraft. Now, while Red Alert 3 is its own case, what Command & Conquer 4 developers did was they added in RPG progression to the strategy genre. And unfortunately, when you have a system that's built on RPS, that's a very rigid set of how things work, tying or locking the player's options to an abstracted method breaks the balance almost in two. And this is what EA learned the hard way with CNC4, and what I think Gas Powered or Robot Entertainment, I always forget which one started, learned with Age of Empires Online. With CNC4, what happened was, as you leveled up your account or your faction, you unlock new researches, you unlock new units. And again, while this is an effective way of providing a progression curve, it wrecks the balance of your game when you start fighting characters or people who aren't at the same level. Let's say, for instance, at level 6, I get a really awesome air unit that just dominates everything. Well, what happens if I'm fighting against someone at level 4 or 3 and I don't have any really good air counters yet? What do? Or what if at level 6 I unlock researches that improve the armor of my units? So if I'm at level 5 and I'm fighting someone who's at level 7, they have access to unit improvement abilities that I don't. Again, on an even playing field, I have no chance at winning. Now, people who defend this will say, well, if you're skilled enough, you should be able to get around it. But that's not really the case and not the point of an RPS system. It should be clear as day as to who has an advantage and what I need to do to win. And if one of your units who is a higher level than mine is just dominating everything that I throw out, that creates a downward spiral. It means I have to spend more resources to deal with your one unit, which frees you up to build more units. And then you will just begin to steamroll over me. Now, taking this even further, when you add powering up or equipment or RPG progression on top of that, this can destroy an RPS system. And if that's what you're banking on your game's foundation to be, that's not good. And that takes me to the Age of Empires Online example. I'm not sure if anyone here is watching that's actually played that game. I may be one of the few lucky ones there. But what they did was you had the different factions. They each had their own units, their own tech trees, their own home city, so on and so forth. And then as you play through the different matches, you get treasure chests that unlock various gear. Bows, armor, helmets, there's like a almanac for farmers, stuff like that, better hoes and rakes. And when you attach them to a unit, it improves their base stats. So a civilian unit with a elite hoe basically can mine or can farm resources a lot faster. Now, anyone who's played a real-time strategy game knows that if you can improve your resource gathering, that makes it easier to build an army. And if it makes it easier to build an army, it means you can field one faster than your opponent. And you can start to see where this begins to break down. But it gets even worse. When you start putting on armor and increase your units or your military units capacities or capabilities, how does that work with a RPS system? Yes, my archers may not be as strong against cavalry units, but if your cavalry units have no gear and I'm using epic or legendary on my archers, they can probably stand toe-to-toe with your cavalry. And in this case, you have a rock unit who cannot be killed by paper. So what are you supposed to do then? Because if I know that my archers can't be defeated by cavalry, then guess what? I don't need to build spearmen, which means that I have to spend less on getting my army, and you have to spend more on yours. And then what happens is my advantage keeps growing and growing, and you're going to just be dominated. And this is why Age of Empires Online was really downvoted by a lot of people. And to add fuel to the fire there, a lot of the epic level gear in that game, you could only put on your units if you bought premium access, which was $20 per civ. So there was even a major pay-to-win component as well. And that takes me to the state of the modern strategy genre. I should probably have done air quotes there. Games like Clash of Clans, Command & Conquer Rivals, South Park Phone Destroyer, and I am sure dozens more on mobile. These games are making use of that same kind of progression. You have your different units, you build your deck or your army or whatever you want to call it, and then you level them up by using in-game currency and usually having to find additional copies via loot boxes. But again, when you're dealing with a hard counter or an RPS system, what happens if your units are more or highly leveled than mine? How am I supposed to win? Because even if I have your counters, if your units are 2 or 3 levels above mine, it's still going to be in your favor. And at that point, balance gets thrown out the window. For instance, when I was playing CNC Rivals, I ran into a situation where the enemy built nothing but vehicles. Okay, well, let me get my anti-vehicle unit out, which is an infantry. Well, oh no, I didn't have the cards or the resources to upgrade him, so he's only level 2, fighting level 4 and 5 tanks and other vehicles. So, what do I do? Because he can kill my units a lot quicker than mine, despite having the counter, which means he gets more resources so he can level up and tech up faster. So I'm kind of behind the 8 ball. And you can see this. I was watching people play games like South Park Phone Destroyer. You get level 5, level 6 units, you're just going to dominate someone who has only, let's say, level 2 or level 3. Because the progression is always built on a growing power curve. A level 3 unit is always going to be better than a level 2. A level 6 is always going to be better than a level 4. And this creates that virtual arms race we've talked about, and why it's become so lucrative for these, I guess, faux strategy games. Because as we always say, as long as you can keep adding numbers, you can keep growing that power curve. And if you keep growing it, you can keep charging people to grow in power. And we'll eventually get to that point where your audience will consist of people who are barely spending money or quitting, and the high-level whales who have to keep spending money to get the resources so they can remain competitive. And not only that, but this may actually be a little bit off tangent, but many of the mobile strategy games only reward you with resources upon winning. You could spend an hour playing matches and not win one, and it will be like you just wasted the entire hour. Because without getting those additional resources, you can't upgrade your cards and make them better. If you can't make them better, then you have no hope of winning. And as long as that keeps happening, you're just going to be pressured to buy more stuff with real currency. And that's when this whole rock, paper, systems thing just falls apart. So, with that said, to wrap things up for today, the RPS system is an essential and easy to follow element for any kind of strategy or tactics-based game that's built on balance. But you have to be careful with how polarizing you make those counters. Too much, and it can make the game feel very one-note. Too little, and why have it at all? So for those of you watching this, here's my question for you. Can you think of a game, doesn't have to be strategy, that made use of an art that did not make use of a rock, paper, scissors type balance, and still was balanced and fine-tuned between all strategies? Let me know in the comments below, but otherwise, thanks for watching today's video. Be sure to check back for daily discussions on game design here, and on Game Wisdom, where examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. Before we get to the credits, I just want to give a quick shout out to the fans and supporters over on patreon.com/GWBycer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/GWBycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.